happens when someone dies? I remember asking myself this question from a very young age onwards, because unfortunately, I've seen quite a few funerals in my life, and I vividly recall the funeral of my maternal grandparent, my Nana ji. And I remember looking at the funeral pyre, when they were cremating him, and really wondering what happens when he's gone to him, because he's no more here. The real loss is something that's felt by people all around us, by me, by my family, and so on. And it's a question that I keep thinking. And the more I've become familiar with death, the more time I've spent with critically ill patients, the more time I've had close loved ones in an ICU, particularly during the COVID pandemic, seeing so many people being ventilated. I keep wondering, am I praying that God, I hope they live for them or for me? And the older I get, I feel the answer is the latter, that we want people to live forever because we can't imagine life without them. But are we really taking into concern what's best for that person and whether they would actually have a life thereafter? This is Sonalia Charji, and you are listening to Health Wealth, a podcast that wants to leave you feeling much better informed about all aspects of healthcare, but to also feel motivated, enthusiastic, and uplifted enough to do something and make the right choices for your well being. I remember the first time I heard the word palliative care. I would have been around 28 years old, and COVID had just begun. And a lady reached out and introduced me to the person we'd be talking to today, who then at that point talked to me about pain management and morphine. And all I knew about morphine was it's something that's bad and something that shouldn't really be talking about. It's addictive and so on. And I remember, what is this person talking about? Why what is, what do I write about morphine and pain management? But then the pandemic happened. And right after that, my father got very sick and he had to be ventilated. He was declared brain dead at one point as well. And there was nothing left to do but to watch and to manage pain, and pain which we are imagining that person feels, because mind you, when somebody is brain dead, you really don't know what they're feeling. And I kept on thinking about this conversation I had had pre-pandemic about palliative care and the right to die with dignity. And what happens to those with life-limiting diseases. And I kept seeing my father as a vegetable, and I'm like, I wish it would end. And you feel so conflicted, because on one hand, you're not supposed to wish for someone to die. That's a bad thing to do. um, but on the other hand, what life is left anyways? So it was a very turbulent moment in life for me. And we did try to, ask the hospital board to allow for a dignified death. It was a very long process. There was a lot of money that was, taken, because, he was on ventilated care for almost 2 weeks. And I remember when the nurse called and said, your father is no more, it was a false alarm, because 2 minutes later, we got a call saying, no, no, he's still here. And then again, 2 minutes later, we got a call saying he's gone. But there was a sense of relief. And I've not felt that with any other death, because I've never seen anyone ventilated for such a long period of time. And you actually feel really thankful that it's over. And with the recent guidelines done by the Karnataka state government on the right to die with dignity, I was actually really happy, and I thought this was a great talking point to talk more about pain management and why we need such a guideline in a very strong legislative national format as well. So we are joined by Dr. MR Rajagopal, who is the founder, chairman emeritus of Pallium India. And I believe some people call him the father of palliative care in India. So I cannot imagine anyone better coming to talk about this. Hello, sir. How are you?
Very good, Sonali. I'm glad you are giving me the opportunity to talk about this very important subject.
I'm glad you took this time out for us. I suppose I've been saying palliative care, but like me, when I first spoke to you, I didn't know what it was. So let's assume no one knows what it is. What is palliative care?
Uh, I'm not giving the official World Health Organization's definition. It's too long and complicated. Simply put, palliative care is management of serious health-related suffering, treating suffering in short, and improving the quality of life. I was sorry to hear about your painful experience with your dad, Sonali. I cannot even imagine how difficult it would have been at that point of time. But once the disease is considered no longer treatable, that's when a return to reasonable quality of life is no longer reasonably possible, then the focus should be only on relieving suffering. There's no sense in prolonging the dying process. When I speak this, I know this is not about somebody else. This is about me tomorrow and you, everyone who is listening. At that time, eh, prolonging the heartbeats by a machine makes no sense. It is only prolonging suffering. Death was a very clear cut thing 2 generations back. Not any longer. Now you talk about brain death, you talk about being vegetative, and that happens because a Lancet Commission report of 2021 put it, we are now a death illiterate society, just a known generation. We have become death illiterate. Nuclear families, people grow up without seeing one death. And what is needed is a death literacy. People need to accept it as the inevitable consequence of life. And therefore, because now what you described, the intensive care death is a reality often, we need to be prepared for this. And the Karnataka government order, Sonali, is really a reiteration of a Supreme Court verdict of 2023. India does not have a law governing this. Therefore, the Supreme Court judgment is what holds valid for the whole country, unless the parliament or a state assembly passes a legislation.
Yeah, we're
So the Karnataka government just forwarded that to everybody. It also made a provision which may speed up the process. You said in your case, it was a long drawn out process. Maybe this might, at least for some people, speed it up a little bit.
We do need to discuss the legislative aspect in detail, but first, before we get there, there's some very popular known myths, which I think is a myth, but I also could be wrong. Maybe my belief of a myth is a myth. But is palliative care only for somebody who is about to die?
Uh, oh, no, in 96 font letters. No, no, no. Palliative care becomes particularly important for the dying, but remember what I said earlier. Palliative care is for all serious health related suffering. From the beginning of an illness to the end, which may be cure. But even if I have a curable cancer, the treatment may go on for a year and a half. Why should I suffer?
Very painful post chemotherapy. I mean, it feels like I've had patients tell me feels like their nerve is on fire, and it's a very painful thing to live with. Tell me about morphine, because you had explained it very beautifully to me, and it really made the somewhat scary medicine seem very humane to me. So, if you could maybe explain a bit about pain management medication and morphine.
Now, morphine is not the only pain management medication. For almost every kind of pain, you use a combination of medicines. But in approximately two-thirds of all people with cancer, and also in many other diseases, pain cannot be relieved without morphine or medicines of that class. Now, this is the fear is new that is brought out by the American drug abuse story. Poppy out of which morphine is made, is grown legally in UP, MP, and Rajasthan under license. The farmers are obliged to sell their product to the government's factory, and they make opium. Use a little bit for producing morphine for our country and export the rest of it, mostly to high income countries which use it for pain relief for them, while our own people are denied pain relief. Now, he used it is actually almost the same chemical is naturally present in your brain, and it is something that is used to relieve pain, and so long as it is used appropriately in the right dose at the right time, the chance of addiction is almost absent. It is negligible. So the fear comes out of the abuse of the West. Now, I won't say West, I would say specifically USA, Canada, and Australia. The same disease is not rampant over Europe, where its use is more rational. What that shows, what the experience from European countries, Uganda, a poorer country than us, and Kerala in India shows, is that it can be safely used. It's essential for humankind. You mentioned the agony of somebody in suffering, like nerves on fire. Pain can be beyond your ability to imagine, beyond your imagination. Similarly, one patient who had a reduced blood flow to his lower limb said what he felt was like somebody poking a red hot iron into his bones and twisting. And I can't imagine that being done to me once for a minute. Here was a man living it for a lifetime. We escape thinking about it, but it is cruel not to provide them with the morphine. Mind you, I totally acknowledge the horrific suffering of addiction. Worldwide, there are supposed to be 32 plus million people in addiction. But let us also remember that there are 61 million people in serious health related suffering. What is needed is a balance.
Yes.
Use it appropriately the way Europe has used it, Uganda has used it, or Kerala has used it.
So, you mentioned the number of people in pain, and it's significant. Um, in India, can an average person access palliative care easily? And what exactly happens if you cannot? I mean, how long can the human body survive with this kind of pain?
Bad news. Even basic pain relief reaches less than 4% of Indians. It's that bad. More than 96 people go through the prolonged agony, such agony that many kill themselves, but a much larger number of people try and fail, and many more number of people wish they had the strength or the courage to kill themselves. And I have had spouses of patients coming to me and telling me, please put something into him and kill him. I cannot bear to see his anymore. Not one person, several. So this is terrible. And there is no justification for us just to, without looking into the realities, without looking into the depth of it, just to say, no, 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 no morphine addiction. No, that is silly. Cruel superstition.
And why isn't such few numbers receive palliative care? Is it a financial constriction, or is it just we don't have enough availability?
Because we don't care. So long as someone else is in suffering, it's easy to pretend that the problem doesn't exist. It is cruel. It is not a matter of cost. I wonder, there is something very interesting. There is a medicine that can be used instead of morphine. Well, maybe not so good, but almost equally. That's called fentanyl. About 150 times more expensive than morphine. And availability of fentanyl in India is many times better than morphine. What does that tell you? Same law governs both.
Yes.
It's easier to get the very expensive thing which destroys families and drive children into hunger. But the inexpensive morphine, no. That's cruel. Yes.
Yes, it is. You've written a book called Walk with the Weary, and I know it's got many of your experiences with palliative care. Are there some that you might like to share today? Like something that just stayed with you over the years?
Um, Many, Sonali. Many that still give me a sense of guilt because in my earlier days, before I understood pain and palliative care, I myself have caused suffering. I remember treating a man with 70% of the body burns. Eventually, with all hard work by so many nurses and we doctors, he came back to life. But he said those 4 or 5 months were sheer agony. No, that he was vocal. He told me that. Imagine all those people with burns in the country. Very few get pain relief. Absolutely cruel. Uh, I remember one. I've told the story briefly in my book. This is a man who was expecting to get the next supply of morphine on a Saturday, and there was a hartal. He did not get morphine. At night, he tried to hang himself from the roof. Then he discovered that he did not have the strength to climb to it upon a chair and spend that night in the kitchen floor. And he never really recovered from the trauma of that day. It can be really agonizing pain, and that's not for a day or a few minutes. Uh, I also have had people, the other side of the story. Uh, I remember particularly an architect and a lawyer, both having advanced cancer, both going on morphine and continuing to work. For the architect, it was vitally important because if he did not finish the project, his family would be destroyed. But he continued. Don't think that with morphine everybody is unconscious. People still function, people still drive. And the lawyer for practiced law for a year and a half, made all preparations, made his will, made all the arrangements, and eventually went. So it's about fulfilling lives also. Gives people time to think. With that intensity of pain, there is no mind space. People are not able to think.
I think it's very important to see, what you talked about, death illiteracy, that somewhere the entire healthcare system has shifted towards saving lives and increasing the lifespan. And I know this, that way back when the oath of, I might say this wrong, but the oath of Hippocrates, which every doctor takes, there is a mention of alleviating suffering, which we've obviously forgotten about, because that's the last thing we're thinking of. When the minute anyone goes into the ICU, the first thing you're not going to think of is this person in pain. You're like, okay, what interventions do we do so that he lives? It's all about life and death. In that moment, what a person is feeling is just lost. Um, and I know that a lot of doctors do talk about this, and they say that we are being medically objective. If we start thinking about that person's condition, that person's emotions, then it might affect our judgment. So then, how do you balance that humanity which you've pledged to give to patients, but also the rationality which you're supposed to show?
Hey, I feel very sorry for the patients who are going to be treated by those medical machines. They are mechanics. Even from the 14th century, the medical teachers have said it is the person that suffers, not the body. And in India, officially, that doctor's duty and mine, the duty of the healthcare provider is officially defined by the bioethics unit of ICMR. The healthcare provider's duty is to mitigate suffering. It is to cure sometimes. Those doctors can cure only about one third of diseases. And I cure sometimes, relieve often, and to comfort always. There exists no exception to this rule. Somehow, especially in the last half a century, with the advent of technology, this so called therapeutic distance has become so huge that healthcare providers now become insensitive to suffering. That's very sad. I wouldn't want to go to any of those medical machines for treatment. I want a human being to care for me. True. There is something about the distancing. I choose to listen to suffering. Naturally, if I allow that to affect my being beyond a certain point, I cannot function. So, this therapeutic distancing is necessary up to a point, but that cannot be so huge that you make the body suffer interminably on life support systems. So, I would tell those doctors, what you are saying is your own philosophy that you may have heard from some other escapist teachers, but that's not part of medical ethics. There is no part of medical ethics or medical jurisprudence which justifies that. And I repeat, that person's duty is officially defined to mitigate suffering. There exists no exception to this rule, according to ICMR's bioethics unit.
Yeah. Actually, it's also the way in which hospitals have become now. We did an episode, I think, a year ago when we were talking about doctor shopping. You enter a hospital and you get these brochures with doctors posing, as if it's a social media feed, and so much of marketing that needs to be done. Every hospital, every doctor has a public relations consultant today, to highlight their surgeries, their achievements, author papers, and it is the pressure to stand out. It is the pressure to make profit. And I mean, it's an ugly word when it comes to healthcare, but it does exist. And there are very few hospitals left. I guess AIMS, Delhi being one of them, and a lot of the public hospitals, Gangaram and so on, where I've actually seen doctors going above and beyond their call of duty, and a large number. And it's really sad, when and I think it's reflecting in people today, because people are scared of going to hospitals. There is a real fear. My mother, for example, keeps telling me, "Don't take me to a hospital." Once I'm there, that's it. Like, they'll just box me into a ventilator, and being a ventilator must be so cruel, endlessly. Tell me, how undignified a death is it when someone dies inside ventilated care?
Speaking for the other side, I will admit that a certain proportion of people may still die on life support systems, however much we try, because some of the deaths are unpredictable. But let me tell you some statistics. Fairly recent, European Union countries, multi-country study, they found that in intensive care units, when treatment was considered futile by the treating doctors, 89.6% of patients, that's almost 90%, were taken out of life support systems and instead given palliative care. Europe, where they could afford to do more, almost 90%. Compare that with India. Again, 2021 publication by Dr. Rajkumar Mani, the much prospected intensivist. He and colleagues found that compared to the 10% in Europe who lie on life support systems, 70% of people here die on life support systems. Their dying process being stretched out cruelly, cruel and vulgar, obscene violation of human rights. There cannot be any justification for that. And we can do all that, but we cannot give the inexpensive palliative care. That doesn't reach 96% of the person people. How is that justifiable? By any means, in a cultured society, how can that be justifiable?
But I think the worst example I've seen of someone in ventilated care, was inside an ICU, and somebody had just woken up, and you have no idea where you are. And for a second, imagine waking up and there's that tube that goes through your mouth, and that person was trying to struggle. And I believe the family members had signed the consent to allow doctors to restrain the person without realizing what they were signing as well. And the nurses tied up this person, and it was I mean, you could see the trauma in that person's eyes, because you have fainted, you've woken up with a tube going into you, you're being tied down. It must have been like a horror film. It is something, I do think about every time I go into an ICU myself, that if I was diagnosed with a life-limiting disease, I would just live my life. I mean, and that's a personal choice, but I would just live it, not ever enter formal healthcare, because it's the control just goes away from me in formal healthcare.
Very sad, which almost sounds very damning of healthcare. I must admit that I have respect for healthcare. I am alive today because of modern medicine. In the right context, It's absolutely essential. And remember that in 1950, when India became a republic, their average life expectancy was 35 years. 70 years hence, in 2020, it was exactly double, 70 years. So this cannot be, like, it's very sad that things have become so bad. But I became a doctor in 1970. Uh, till 1985, no, till the late 90s, uh, I had not heard the word healthcare industry. We had only healthcare service. And then it got transformed to an industry. What's the purpose of the industry? You mentioned that tube is going into the most sensitive part of the human body. That is the breathing tube. If you have a bit of dust going in it, you cough horribly. That's where a suction catheter goes in, gets twisted as it is withdrawn. And I'm sorry that I'm scaring you, but how
You're not scaring me. You're just making me aware.
I, as I said, if tomorrow I have an accident and my 5 ribs are broken, I want ICU because I know that in about 6 days I can be out of it. But in the context of incurable treatment, I repeat, incurable diseases, it's a violation of human rights.
Agree. That's why if I know I'm going to die, I'd rather not go to healthcare. But
That's your right
I feel
also.
very safe in an ICU.
And about the physical restraint, many of our doctors have been trained in the West. It doesn't happen there. There you say chemical restraint. I mean, they have sedation protocols. Because physical restraint is known to worsen the chance of agitation 44 times. So all scientifically proved things. And this tying up human beings. Well, there may be exceptional situations where one may be forced to do it, but this is inexcusable. I know I'll make many people angry because I say this, but I would say, please think what you need to do is to borrow a sedation protocol from a Western university and make it apply, and not just tie people up. Like you don't do that even to animals.
Um, and I remember when we were doing an episode on mental health care, a psychiatric hospital, the doctor came and she said, "We don't tie anyone up." And, normally you associate tying up with a mentally ill, patient. And in here, actually, I forgot in that moment that it actually does happen in our regular hospitals. So, yes, when when there is an accident or a surgery that I know I'll recover from, I mean, I do feel. I mean, I'm very thankful to modern healthcare myself, and I know how difficult it is to be a doctor as well. So I think the answer lies more in the legal framework and how much it allows doctors' rooms and patients' room to make these choices. So death with dignity. What is it? Because, when you hear that, you first think, is it euthanasia? Is it murder? So what is death with dignity? What would framework look like?
Uh, there is a problem with that phrase, death with dignity, because in USA they brought out this Death with Dignity Act, which permitted euthanasia. So that phrase came to have a bad connotation, but dying with dignity, I know my time will come. What what will I consider a death with dignity, if possible, in my own home? If that's not possible, maybe in a hospital room, but with my family around me, whoever is available. A hand to hold is so very much more important than all those machines. At that time, I would like all the tubes out. I would like to say a final farewell to a loved one, maybe a final hug, a hand to hold. Those are the only important things. That's just with dignity. And if that's to be obtained, now there is another thing that I have to do. I have done that. That I had to prepare myself. If one is afraid of thinking about death, then you are unable to make preparation for that. Then the matter goes out of your hand. Because if you are able to think about it, you prepare an advanced medical directive, which is otherwise called a living will, as recommended in the Supreme Court verdict of 2023, which I have done. I have written it, named a couple of relatives, my sons, as the proxies or attorneys to take over decisions when I no longer have decision making power. I also got the document countersigned by a gazetted officer, and with that, it's a legally valid document. But more than preparing that legally valid document, everyone who is listening to this, please note this for future. More important is to discuss the matter with your family. Because unless your family agrees to this, it will, well, though it is legally valid, who is going to care? They know that you cannot go to court once you are dead. People will listen to your family. So this matter, however hard it is for you, has to be discussed within the family and agreed upon.
No, I went to an English medium school, and English was stressed upon a lot. And so we read a lot of poetry, a lot of prose, and from the Victorian times. So there was a lot of poetry about death and, renewal, winter, the idea of winter of one's life, of the twilight of one's life. There was so much of poignancy and thought given to death. And since then, I believe I really we don't discuss death. It's really not something. If I call up my lawyer today and say, "Hey, I want to write a will," she's going to say, "At 36, like what are you expecting? Are you dying? Like who? Why would you do that? It's not something that's encouraged in the least. So." I did want to end this on some poignancy and um, something beautiful as well, so we can all normalize talking about death. You have seen so much of suffering and death, and you have walked with the weary. How are you not weary yourself? How are you able to talk about death but not get overwhelmed by it? How can you see suffering but not suffer yourself? How you find?
Similarly, it's a very fulfilling experience to walk with the weary. And see, people come to us begging to be killed. I cannot bear to spare this. Please kill me. And the next day, after the person has had pain relief or treatment for the breathlessness or whatever, and after you have made the person reasonably comfortable and make the person feel that he is being cared for with love, you see the person sitting up in bed and having breakfast the next morning, giving you a smile and often saying thank you. And a child in agony giving you a reward, a bribe with a kiss. A family is coming back immediately in a day after the funeral just to say thank you for caring for my dad. Those were very, very fulfilling experiences. We store those memories. But then sometimes the suffering of the person can be so agonizing that it's painful, very painful for us also. So the answer is not to kill the humanity in us, but to share our pain with colleagues. Anybody in palliative care would be willing to listen to a colleague who is a bit overcome with emotion. We share. A shared problem is a problem that is halved. And also, we need to be aware that we are human beings and there are limits to what we can do. But this is so much better than saying theory of uh, the therapeutic distance and running away from suffering. It's fulfilling to face it and wipe it here,
I think when you live a fulfilled life, then that is not that frightening either, is it?
especially if you are able to think about it.
Mhm.
Accept it as the inevitable consequence of life and maybe even prepare for it, even at the age of 36.
Thank you for everything you've shared. This has been so enlightening and so moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonami.
I thought, it's been so long since I've heard or read or spoken about poetry to do with death. I didn't want to read out the entire poem because it is long, but it's a lovely poem by a lady called Christina Rossetti, and it's called When I Am Dead. And of course, you can look it up online. But the gist of it is she says that when I'm dead, don't cry for me, celebrate, try to put, something beautiful in my memory. Um, let my grave have a natural life with rain falling on me and flowers falling on me. And if you could remember me and you miss me, trust me, in time you'll also forget me. And she says, then she talks about herself as a dead person, and she mentions that I'm dead, so I can't see the rain, I can't hear the birds, I can't see the flowers you're leaving for me because I'm not there anymore. And just as I remembered my life, I also know that one day I'll forget my life because I'm dead. And it was a I know it's very easy to say celebrate, don't feel bad. You will miss the person. I think 95% of our lives is just human connection. So you will miss the person a lot, and it never gets easier, no matter how much people say it does. But if you think about it, and if you're not afraid to talk about it and you share your experiences, it gets much more tolerable and you do learn a lot. You do grow a lot as a person. So if this episode brought some value to your life and gave you new awareness, and if there's something more you'd like to know about Death with Dignity, please let us know your thoughts. We're available on pods@indiatoday.com, or you can message us on 8588896696. And we are also available on various social media channels, so please do reach out.